Hey everyone! Well, it's been a couple weeks or a week and a half, I don't know. It's been a while since the last time we worked on this truck. And honestly, it's been really fun to drive, albeit a little bit scary. So I don't know if I told you, but when we were working on it before, I found it has a broken coil spring on the left front. It's got about a coil and a half broke off. Given this nice aggressive stance that it has, it also has shocks that are completely wore out. I mean, they just nothing. So I figure if I got to put shocks on it and I got to put a coil spring in it, I might as well go ahead and replace the lower control arms as well and lower it, right? I mean, it made sense in my head. So I've got a set of van control arms that we're going to put on the front. I've got a couple of used coil springs that I'm going to clean up and paint. I've got some used shocks that work really good. I'm going to clean them up and paint them. I've also got a sway bar kit, stock, off of a parts truck outside. It's got one piece I got to fix, and I got some new bushings for it. And then we're going to get a sway bar, a lowering kit, new shocks, and new springs or new used springs, but they'll look brand new because they're going to be painted on the front. And then on the back, I've got everything that I need to flip the axle on top of the springs and really lower the back. Right now, I mean, this side's probably got 1.5 inch lowering kit on the front, or maybe 2 inches, and it's going to end up with about 3. And the back already sits 3 inches higher. So hopefully, I don't know, we'll see. Hopefully it comes out pretty level and low to the ground. While I'm doing the back, I figure there's no point in leaving the 276 gears that are in it because I have a rear end that I can use that has 355 gears in it. And while if I was just gonna leave everything else alone, the 276 gears would probably be better. But since I'm also gonna have to shorten the drive shaft when I lower the back that much, I figure that's the perfect opportunity to go ahead and change the transmission and put an overdrive transmission in it, because I'm going to have to shorten the drive shaft for that too. So then I only have to shorten it once and I get both things done. So I don't actually have an overdrive transmission ready to go. I have part of one there, another part of one, a whole one but doesn't fit this there, a tote full of parts in the back, and an extra transmission that's not even close to the same transmission that might have some usable parts in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all those apart and meld them together into what is hopefully a working A518 or 46RH overdrive transmission that will bolt in to our 88 Dodge pickup. I'm going to have to change the torque converters that I have because all I have is externally balanced 360 torque converters. And to do that, I'm just going to cut the weight off of one of them. I'm going to look through them. I've got 4 or 5 of them, and hopefully I pick one that works. And yeah, I mean, I'll get the transmission ready. I'm going to get let me show you what we got. Okay, so here we have our A518 that we're going to build for Shorty. We've got a gas four-wheel drive tail section, overdrive section. This is a diesel 47RH with lockup that I'm gonna build for the crew cab project someday. But I need this to be a 4-wheel drive transmission, and I need this one to be a 2-wheel drive transmission. So we're gonna take parts out of that 4-wheel drive transmission tail housing, combine them with parts out of that 2-wheel drive tail housing, make a 4-wheel drive tail housing for the diesel transmission, a 2-wheel drive tail housing section for the gas transmission, put the gas transmission in Shorty, save that to rebuild for the crew cab. There's the rear end we're going to use. It's 9 1/4, 355 gears. There's some of the suspension parts that I still got to clean up and paint. I'll check with you guys once I get the transmissions apart and kind of show you what the plan is there. I've got both overdrive sections completely tore apart here. And near as I can tell, I'm going to point out the differences between the two. The first, and the one that I absolutely knew was going to be the fact, our diesel transmission has the brass governor weight. And the governor weight is what determines the shift points in a RH style hydraulically controlled transmission. So we definitely need to keep this with the diesel parts. The gas one has this steel one, and I don't know. You need a real scale to tell the difference between those two. Now, another difference that I wasn't expecting, our 46 RH transmission has a regular rounded Woodruff key. And so this fits in our 46 RH tail or output shaft where the governor body slides, the governor drive slides on. The 47 RH, although I don't think this one, let me get close to the camera, make sure you guys can see this, make sure it focuses. Come on, focus. Focus on it. There you go. This little drive key, I'm thinking that one is not good. So I'm going to find a different one for that. I have another transmission I can take apart out there. But so it uses just a regular square key stock. And there's not enough room, and they did that to increase the output shaft strength. There's not enough room in the output shaft for the regular rounded one, so we'll have to find a different drive key for the output shaft on this one. Now, I am putting this in a diesel, but I'm not too concerned about it. It's not going to be some crazy hot rod 2,000 horsepower diesel. It's just going to be basically a stock VE pump, which the 46 RH that would have came in that truck would have had this Woodruff key anyway. But you know, that's way down the road. Maybe at that point we'll decide to buy a build output shaft or whatever, but we're not going to worry about this one. We're just trying to get this one working for our gas truck Shorty. So that'll be fine. The next difference that I found is this is the overdrive clutch. This is the clutch that actually engages the overdrive in the tail section. On the diesel transmission, it has 5 clutches, 4 steels, and it's actually a 5th steel, and it's the main plate. On the gas transmission, that front spacer is this thick pressure plate, and it has 4 clutches. So we'll swap that. We'll put the 4 clutches in our gas transmission. And then the direct clutch, which is the one that's under the spring pressure, on the gas transmission had 8 clutches, and on the diesel transmission, it had 9 clutches. And the difference on those what makes up for the extra clutch is this spacer or the pressure plate. It's thinner on the diesel transmission or the 47 RH than it was on our gas transmission. And you can see that difference there. So make sure we put those back right. And then the last difference that I can see is on the Planet. Our gas transmission had a 4-pinion steel Planet, and our diesel transmission had a 5-pinion steel Planet. I've checked, the splines are the same. They're the same. So we'll just swap the 4-pinion into our gas transmission. So I'm going to go ahead and get the tail shaft housing cleaned up and put this back together and throw it on the shelf. Actually, I'm going to stick it back on that transmission. And then I'm going to get this one built and ready to put on our transmission, and then we're going to start working on the actual transmission itself. I don't have to swap any parts over. I'm just going to go through it and make sure the clutches and everything are good and put it back together. But that's basically all I'm going to show you on this, because this is basically the meat and potatoes of what we're swapping. The rest of it's just a normal transmission rebuild, and there's plenty of that on the internet. So I know, back so soon. I actually did miss one difference. And it's very minor, but I don't know if you guys will be able to tell on the video, or the YouTube video. Let me get closer over here. But if you look, the angle or the pitch on those gears is just a little bit different. And so I can't swap this 5-pinion into here. So I'm just going to leave the 4-pinion one in the 4-wheel drive transmission and use the 5-pinion in Shorty, because I don't feel like swapping the drum. I guess I could. I don't even know if I'm going to use any of these parts, because there is an upgrade on the diesel one to a 6-pinion Planet, And when I do that, if I do that, I'll get the drum and everything. So I'm just going to put the 4-pinion planet back in the gas transmission, and we'll use the heavier 5-pinion planet in Shorty. It's not going to need it. It's a 318, but it works. So just wanted to bring you guys up to date on that. We got the transmission all built. It's not exactly what I was planning, but I'll tell you about that a little bit later. Right now, I think I have all the parts minus the actual sway bar ready to go to start putting or lowering Shorty here. Before I start though, I want to get a real world with a tape measure and a scientific-ish mark idea of how much we're going to affect the ride height on this truck. Now, bear in mind, this is going to be a little bit off because the left front spring is broken. I don't think that will affect the rear, but it is going to affect the measurements in the front some. So we'll have to just keep that in mind. But it should give us a pretty good idea of at least where we're going to end up with a 28-inch tall tire, or on the rears, I think these are 30 inches tall. I'm going to leave the same tires. I have other tires to put on the rear, but well, I will have other tires to put on the rear, but they're not here yet. So we're going to go back with the exact same tires when we're done as what's on it right now, so this measurement actually counts. All I'm going to do for that is I'm going to take a piece of masking tape and I'm going to find a spot on the quarter panel around the wheel well, wheel opening here, and I'm going to measure from the floor, and I'm going to make a mark at an even inch mark. This one will be 38 inches. I'm going to do that on all 4 corners, and then I'm going to leave that tape on there, and when we're done, we can measure back to that mark and see just how much we lowered it. I'm expecting to get about 6 inches in the back. So I'm expecting that mark to be clear down here when we're done. It's going to be a lot. Should be pretty impressive difference. So we're going to start up here in the front, and the reason we're going to start in the front is, like I said, there's a broken spring on this side, and I'm going to try to extrapolate if the front is going to affect the rear much by doing the front first. We have 33 on this side and 35 on the other side. So this side's starting out 2 inches lower than the other side. I'm going to change the spring where I don't know if I've said it yet, but we're putting van lower control arms on it. I'm going to cut the bump stop mount off, shorten it, and re-weld it back on about 2 inches or 3 inches higher, about the difference of what the control arm is. And then we're going to change the radius rod on this side because it's also bent. And at the same time, we're going to add a factory sway bar off of another truck, but it's not going to be on here right now because I haven't got to painting it yet. Everything else is painted, ready to go, but the sway bar is not done, so we're going to wait and do that later. I have a bunch of work that's planned for this truck, and this process is honestly going to be over the course of a week or maybe 2. I'm going to get as much done as I'd like to see if I can get the suspension done and get the rear end put in today and possibly get the transmission swapped so that I can measure for a drive shaft tomorrow, but I don't know if that's going to happen. It's already pretty late in the day. I mean, it's already well into the afternoon, and I got a lot of work to do. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and pull the tires off. I'll just show you along the way things that I find that like I said, that if I find something that, it's not a how-to video, but if I find something that can help you figure it out, I'll try to film it and give you an idea. More than anything, this is just kind of like, this is what we did, and hopefully it's cool to you too. The measurements, they're going to be a little scuffed because we start with a broken spring, but they might help you as well. About 20 minutes later, spring's out. It was almost exactly a coil, but if you look at it, that coil spring was already weak because this coil should be spread. Maybe somebody heated it to try to lower it. I'm not sure, but it's definitely broke, so we won't be using that. And then the lower control arm come out just like you'd expect. 5/8 bolt. We are going to have to drill the lower control arm mount out to 3/4 because the van control arms take a 3/4 bolt, and I've got some 3/4 5-inch bolts to put in there. And then the ball joints look good. All the suspension feels pretty tight. The bushing doesn't look terrible. It's a little cracked, but not terrible. The shock is absolutely wore out. Nothing left of that one. So we already knew that though. All right, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and drill this out, mount the lower control arm, put the spring in there, get it up, and just see how much of that bump stop I do actually need to cut off. There's two modifications you have to make to your new lower control arms in order to make them work. You have to drill these two holes, and all I did, I don't know if it's right, it's the way I did it, measured from the center of the pivot to that hole on the old control arm. It was 14.5 on one side and 14.75 on the other side. Then I drew a line through that. I measured between here, found center. There's a tab here, so don't let that mess you up. Should be centered on the ball joint, in which it is. And then those holes were 1 7/8 inches apart, or center to center. So that's what I did. I don't know if it's right, but feel free to use whatever magic you want to locate those two holes. The other thing you have to do is there's a steering stop for the van on here, interferes with your radius rod, and you have the steering stop built into the radius rod, so I just got rid of it. I don't know if that would work with these spindles. I'm not going to try. I just cut it off and then cleaned it up. I'll paint this after I get it on there. And then drill the holes out down there to 3/4, get your longer bolts or your bigger bolts, and I'm going to go ahead and get this reassembled and figure out what we have to do on that bump stop. There's one other modification that I forgot about. So on these lower control arms, from, I don't know, somewhere up here to about halfway down the back, you've got to grind about half of this thickness off to clear the bushing or the mount in there. It's not this part that's really fat up here hangs up. She is low. I haven't done the bump stops yet. I decided to wait until I got it all done. I want to see just how, because everything's moving as you change things here. So what happened on that one, the left rear is now a 1/2 inch higher than it was. The right rear is a 1/2 inch lower than it was. The left front is 1 1/4 inches lower than it was. And the right front is 2 3/4 lower than it was. I can't really get over there so you can see. But the look from the front, I'm digging it. Now it's time to get the rear end done. And for the rear end, I'm just flipping the axle. I've got new shackles over there. The garage is an absolute disaster. I did a Krylon overhaul on it. I did check the oil. The oil looks good. I didn't paint the brake drums because, well, I didn't feel like it. And they were oily, and I probably should have, but I didn't. Anyhow, perches are all cut off. I have new perches and new U-bolts. I just got to get it up, get the old one out, and then put this in there. And I can't finish it because I don't have my angle finder. So I'll have to weld it tomorrow, but at least I can get it in there and set it down and, you know, set the pinion angle rough by eye and adjust it later. I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. If we run into anything interesting along the way, I'll show you guys. All right. Now that I practiced once, apparently without audio, we'll go over it again. It's lowered. I love it. I really like the way it turned out. Van control arms in the front, spring over, or axle over spring in the rear, turned out awesome. So I'm going to show you what I did to make the I don't know, it's not spring perches. It's the piece that clamps on the bottom of the axle. This was originally on the axle. As you can see, the axle sat in here, the leaf spring sat here, leaf spring sat on top of the axle, and then this clamp or this plate went on top, and then the U-bolts went across the leaf spring and down in here. Once we move the axle on top of the leaf springs, this can't really hook to the leaf springs. So all you do is you take this plate that was the bump stop plate off the top, this wing catches the bump stop, and you cut out the corners here until it fits down in this channel, weld it all back up, grind it flat, and now you have a flat mount for the bottom of your U-bolts. But anyway, how did it turn out? I'm really happy. So I keep saying I'm really happy, but I am really happy. So in the left front, we went from 33 inches to 31 3/4 for a total loss of 1 1/4 inches. Now, that's a little bit jaded because remember this had a broken spring in the left front. The right front went from 35 inches to 32.25 for a loss of 2 3/4. I think that's closer to what you can expect. I did swap springs, and the new springs had a slightly taller free height, like a 1/2 inch. So I would expect you probably would lose close to 3 to 3.5 inches by doing the van control arms if you kept the same springs. But I didn't, so I lost 2 3/4. On the left rear, we went from 38 inches to 33 inches for a loss of 5 inches. And on the right rear, we went from 38 inches to 32 inches for a loss of 6 inches. And I think what happened there is before with the broken left front spring, it was dragging the front down and picking the rear up. And that's why the right rear went down so much more. Now, the marks, remember, these marks were just an arbitrary line that I drew on a piece of masking tape that I stuck to the fender. So that's not saying that it was way uneven or everything was the same before or anything like that. That's just where I started. And I can tell you that I've now since put a tape measure on all of the wheel openings, and it sits about a 1/2 inch higher in the back, and it leans driver's side down just a little bit. And I think that's just a common trait with these trucks. I've heard that. I've heard people say that before, and that's the way this one turned out. I'm really a little bit concerned though, because I still have the tall tires on the back, and I am going down to a 275/60 as soon as I get here. And that's going to bring the back down even more. And I think it's going to be okay. It might end up being just a little bit lower in the back than it is in the front, but I think that'll be okay. It's not going to be a noticeable difference, I don't think. Gotta go ahead and do the transmission now because I have to have the drive shaft cut because we dropped it so much, or I'm assuming I do, I haven't measured. But if I'm going to cut the drive shaft, I might as well go ahead and put my overdrive transmission in at the same time. So that's what I'm going to get to work on. Something I didn't mention, and I probably should have, but our exhaust no longer fits, so I had to cut that off. There's not enough room for the axle to where it sits. It pushes the exhaust up when you let the truck down. Anyway, that's not what this is about. This video is about swapping the transmission. As you can see, I built the tower of totes to hold up my transmission drain pan so I could drain the oil out of the transmission so it doesn't spill over the floor when we drop it out of here. But all I've done so far is basically disconnect a few things, and I'm just going to swap the transmission. There's really nothing to see there. We are going to have to make some modifications for the mount, but I'll show all that to you guys once the transmission is in there. I'm going to go ahead and get the 904 out and get our 518 in. I just realized I haven't actually even shown you guys the transmission or told you how that turned out, so let me grab the camera and I'll show you. Well, here is our A518 transmission all built and ready to go. And I kind of hinted towards my converter that I got. And so what this converter is, because I switched this transmission to lockup when I rebuilt it, I didn't actually have a converter for it. But this is a stock converter for a 94 Dodge truck with a 318 Magnum, and according to the research I did, it should be a 2300 to a 2600 stall converter. And then I was a little concerned about that, but then I realized it has lockup, so I won't have to worry about it burning transmission fluid if I'm cruising around and not reaching stall and getting stuff hot. So I did go ahead and paint up my B&M pan that was already on it. You can't see it, but it's painted black, and I used a belt sander to sand off the fins, so it's got the shiny fins. I drilled 2 holes. Oh, this bolt here. This bolt is just for people to wonder why it's in there. The reason it's in there is that was what was holding it to the stand that I built it on, and with that B&M pan, it won't come out without taking the pan off, and I didn't feel like taking the pan off, so I just put a nut on it to hold it in there. Shouldn't hurt anything. But I did drill 2 holes in the pan for sensors. I'm going to have one for a transmission temp gauge that I'm going to put in it, and the second one is if I ever decide to put a auxiliary cooler with a fan on it, I can put a fan switch in that. And I figured while the pan was off and I had to clean it anyway, I might as well drill both of them. I'm just going to plug one of them for right now. Anyway, I'm going to get this put in, and then we'll kind of go over what we have to do to make this work in our old truck that does not have overdrive. It does actually have lockup, but it's not going to work the same way because I'm pretty sure the 904 that's in it locks up hydraulically, and we're going to do it electronically with our new transmission. Got our 904 out of the truck, and I just wanted to show you the difference between the 904 and the A518. You can see how much beefier the 518 is, especially in the tail housing. I am not sure if it's going to fit, so I decided to go ahead and do the wiring before I got it in there, because if it does fit, it's going to be super tight. If you're not aware, this truck is a two-wheel drive automatic transmission tunnel, which means it's got a little teeny tiny transmission tunnel. If we look in here, it's filthy inside. You can see how small that transmission tunnel is compared to the four-wheel drive or manual transmission tunnel, which is almost twice as big. So, and the width-wise, not height-wise, I'm not sure how much room there's going to be, because it's going to be especially tight right here at the back of the transmission, right where I have to run those wires. So I'm going to go ahead and do the wiring while it's out of here. Plus, it's easier for me to show you guys what I'm going to do and what you would need to do if you wanted to do this swap yourself. It's pretty straightforward. So if you have a hydraulically controlled A518, which is a 46RH, then you'll have either a 2 or a 3-wire plug right here. If you have a 2-wire plug, you have an overdrive transmission. If you have a 3-wire plug, you have overdrive and lockup. Now, this plug is actually out of a newer truck, but to my knowledge, it's always the center pin on this one. It's this green and black wire is switched ignition power, and then the grounds for the 2 solenoids are controlled by the computer. In our case, or it would be a computer even in the older trucks, it just would be OBD1 instead of OBD2. And basically what it does is it puts a ground to the brown wire when it wants overdrive, and it puts a ground to the orange and black wire when it wants lockup. What we're going to do is put toggle switches on them for right now. Eventually, I would like to hook up pressure switches that will control this using governor pressure, which is a test port on the transmission. And you just run that governor pressure, and I'll run a manifold with several switches in it, and then that pressure increases as the speed of the truck increases. So you get an adjustable switch, and when you get to the pressure for the speed that you want it to shift at, that switch controls the relay. Or I think in the past I ran that switch straight to the torque converter solenoid, or to the overdrive solenoid in the pan through that plug, and it shifts it into overdrive at, say, 45 miles an hour. You can do the same thing with the lockup, but for right now, like I said, this one's getting put on toggle switches because I don't currently have any of those switches, and I forgot to order them, to be honest. So we're going to go ahead and get it put in, just run toggle switches, and down the road at some point, we'll go ahead and hook up the governor pressure switches to control overdrive and lockup. Transmission is in there. I've got just the back bolt in that mount in it for right now. The side bolts on the cross member are tight. The speed sensor won't fit. The cross member's in the way. If we get over here, you can see it. So I'm gonna have to clearance the edge of the cross member a little bit. I'm not too concerned. I did find a set of the brackets for both sides, so I'll put those on. The only place that I had to clearance it, it's gonna be hard to get an angle where you can see it, is right there for that. That's the overdrive pressure test port. See if we focus on the transmission then. Well, anyway, I can't really get a good angle where you can see it. Let me move these wires out of the way. Yeah, can't get in there where you can see it, but it's got clearance. It's got about 1/8 or 3/16. If the engine rocks any, it might touch the floor, but I don't think it's going to hurt anything. It's a solid edge of that tail housing. My speed sensor wiring is not going to reach, because no matter where I run the wiring back here, it gets pinched going over the top of that tail housing, And there's clearance up there, but it just is too tight for that wiring to go through on this side over here. So we're gonna have to just run that up there, and I'll have to extend that wire out for the speed sensor, but that's no big deal. I've got an extra harness. I can just cut the speed sensor off of it and add length to it. Yeah, I'm really happy with how it fits. I was worried that I was gonna have to do a lot more clearancing on the floor than that. I thought that I was gonna have to clearance this side, which, as you can see, it does not have a lot of clearance, but it's not touching. And I mean, it's got a 1/4 inch or better. The top's the same way. If it break a motor mount or something, it might touch the floor, but I don't think it's gonna hurt anything. And I don't think it's close enough that it's gonna rattle. If it does, I guess I'll get under here with a hammer and make more room. I'm gonna make a bracket for the front mount on the transmission cross member here. So as you can see, all I gotta do is make a little stand so I can catch that front bolt, and I'll bolt it into the original bolts there and just go up, catch that bolt, and go back down on the other side. The factory one, this cross member is different on an overdrive. This rib is up higher and it catches that bolt. But since we don't have one of those, I have one. It's in my truck that I drive, so I can't steal it. So I'll just make a little channel that catches that bolt and bolts into these 2 bolts down here, and then it should be good to go. Yeah, everything else went right together. I did remember to mark the torque converter and the flex plate before I put them in there. So we're good to go there. Have maybe a touch more clearance than I'd like, but I think it'll be okay. It's 3/16 or so, maybe a 1/4. Everything else looks like it's gonna fit. This is gonna go right back where it's supposed to. This is gonna reach just fine. I don't know what gear the truck's in or the transmission, so, but my kickdown linkage is gonna work okay, or kickdown cable kit's gonna work okay. There's my holes for my sensors. Kinda close, you can see, if you look inside there, one of them, I saw the filter through one of the holes, yeah. But they don't stick in there very far, so it should be good to go. All right, so now we're on the top side, doing the wiring. And we've got our harness that's gonna go inside the cab. We've got our overdrive and our lockup wire, which will just be a switch to ground inside the cab. And we've got our transmission temp sensor wire. They just go right over here to a weather pack where the switched 12-volt wire joins to go down to the transmission to operate the solenoids in the transmission. I do have to change this connector. I forgot I had this wire, so I'm gonna have to go ahead and add this four-pack connector like this one. And then it's time to run this inside the cab, but I'm not gonna do that now. And the reason I'm not gonna do that now is, as you can see, I've got some numbers written on the valve cover there. Well, I ran the compression on a 318. I've been chasing an idle miss that I just can't get rid of. It goes away just a little above idle, it seems like, but at an idle it has a dead miss. Well, we've got 115, 110, 105, and 115 on this side, which is all kind of low, but pretty even. I mean, not great, but fair enough. This side we've got 120, 125, 120, and then on that back hole you can see we've only got 90 on number 7. I'm thinking that's probably what the idle miss is. So the plan is, I wanted to put a 360 in here, and now I have a good reason to. So before I do any more work, because once I pull this engine out, I am gonna paint the engine compartment. I'm gonna have to pull most everything out of it. I don't know if I'm gonna strip the heater box out of it, because I also want to paint the interior, because I have new carpet and a nice seat cover, and I want to paint the inside of the cab because I plan on painting this truck, and it's a color change, so I need to do the interior as well. I don't know if I'm going to do that at the same time or separately. We'll just have to stay tuned and see where we end up. But this is the end of the lowering and transmission swap video, because it's basically done. The only thing left to do is to hook up these 2 switches put the drive shaft in it and it's ready to drive. But I'm gonna pause that while I figure out the engine, and we'll be back in the next video where we build the 360 and get it put in here and hopefully get everything painted and get it back on the road.